My sister never liked me. At least, that's what it always felt like. Like I was the unwanted shadow at every family gathering, the one who didn't quite belong. The latest blow came last weekend. She told me outright I wasn't good enough to come. Not to the birthday dinner, the one event we all looked forward to every year. The words hit me like a punch, but I didn't react in the way she expected. Instead of begging or explaining, I walked away quietly with a plan brewing beneath the surface. A secret I'd kept hidden for years, one she could never have imagined. Our family is a complex web of comparisons, silent competitions, and unspoken grudges. She was always the shining star, the perfect daughter, the one with the flawless smile and the successful career. Me? I was the other sister, the one who faded into the background, quietly observing, quietly waiting for my moment. But this time, her exclusion wasn't just an accident or a petty sibling squabble, it was deliberate, calculated. She wanted me erased, ignored, forgotten. And that stung more than any argument ever could. I spent years wondering what I lacked. Was it the degree I never finished? The job that never impressed? Or was it simply that I wasn't polished enough, pretty enough, or charming enough to fit their mold? The family gatherings were like a stage, and she was the lead actor, basking in the spotlight while I stood behind the curtains, watching, planning, waiting. The more she pushed me away, the stronger my resolve grew. I wasn't about to let her define my worth, not anymore. So I started building something secret, something powerful. What they didn't see was me working tirelessly behind closed doors, transforming my quiet skills into a force they couldn't ignore. It wasn't just about proving her wrong anymore, it was about reclaiming my dignity and respect on my own terms. The days of being the overlooked sister were over, even if they didn't know it yet. And the revelation I was preparing to share would change everything, including her. I didn't rush to confront her immediately. I let the silence stretch, let the tension build. The secret I'd been harboring wasn't just a small victory, it was a game changer. And when the moment came, I was ready to pull back the curtain and expose not only my success, but also the emptiness behind her perfect facade. I wanted her to see what real strength looked like, not the superficial kind she flaunted, but the kind forged in quiet persistence and resilience. Family is complicated, tangled in years of memories, betrayals, and unspoken truths. But sometimes the hardest battles aren't fought with words or anger. They're fought in the quiet spaces where the truth lives, waiting to be revealed. This was my battle, my secret weapon. And the next family gathering? It wouldn't just be another event to endure. It would be the moment I reclaimed my place, shattered illusions, and finally made her kneel. For years, I watched her glide through life effortlessly, like the world was made to bend to her will. She had a charisma that commanded attention, a smile that disarmed critics, and a way of making people feel she was untouchable. Behind all that, though, I knew the truth, because I'd lived it. Her perfection was a carefully crafted mask, hiding insecurities and fears that no one else saw. And while she controlled the narrative in our family, I controlled something far more powerful, the truth she never wanted anyone to know. The secret I kept wasn't just a small side project or a hobby, it was a full transformation of my life. While she polished her social image and collected accolades, I was quietly building an empire from the ground up. It started as a small business, something to prove I could stand on my own feet without her approval or anyone else's validation. The early days were tough, filled with failures and moments I wanted to give up, but I held on because this was mine. Every late night, every missed party, every doubt I silenced was a brick in my foundation. I had no intention of sharing this with the family until she pushed me away so publicly. That exclusion was the final spark. It wasn't just about her opinion anymore. It was about claiming the respect I deserved. The irony was delicious. I knew the moment I revealed my success, the very people who dismissed me would be forced to acknowledge what I had achieved. And most of all, she would have to face the reality that she wasn't the only one who could shine. But this wasn't just a story of success. It was a story about survival and reclamation. Each setback I faced only fueled my fire. Every dismissive glance, every whispered insult behind my back, every time I was told I wasn't enough, it all became fuel. While she was busy curating the perfect image for everyone else, I was building something real for myself, something she couldn't touch. The strength that comes from being underestimated is incomparable. It's a quiet power that grows beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to explode. When I finally told a close friend about my plans, she looked at me with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "You've been hiding this all along?" she asked, her voice thick with surprise. I nodded. Sometimes the people closest to you aren't the ones you need to impress. I've learned to play the long game. That's when it hit me how blind everyone was to my real story. They only saw what I appeared to be, a shadow next to my sister's spotlight. But I was more than that. I was a storm gathering strength. The next family gathering was approaching fast. I knew it would be a showdown, whether I wanted it or not, but I wasn't scared. I was ready to step into the light and show them who I really was. Not the overlooked sister, not the one who took their words and swallowed them quietly. This time, I was taking control, and when the truth came out, there was no turning back. The family I thought I knew was about to be shaken to its core, and at the center of that storm, me. The day of the gathering arrived with a heavy weight pressing on my chest. Walking into that house, the same one where I had spent countless awkward holidays feeling invisible, felt different this time. I wasn't just a guest anymore. I was a force they had underestimated, and I was ready to remind them of it. The room was filled with familiar faces, all perfectly poised, exchanging polite smiles and rehearsed conversations. My sister was there, radiant as always, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on me, an expression of barely concealed disdain flickering across her face. I didn't waste time with small talk or forced pleasantries. Instead, I made my way to the center of the room, where all eyes suddenly turned toward me. There was a brief, stunned silence as the gravity of my presence settled in. I could feel the tension coil like a spring ready to snap, but I stayed calm, letting the silence stretch just long enough for everyone to realize I wasn't here to blend in or be ignored. Then I began to speak, not loudly, but with the steady confidence of someone who had weathered storms far worse than family drama. I told them about the years they had dismissed me, the times they excluded me, the whispers behind closed doors. I spoke of the secret I had kept, my business, the challenges I had overcome, and the success I had quietly built. Their expressions shifted from confusion to shock, and some of the more sympathetic faces even showed signs of admiration. My sister's eyes narrowed, her jaw tightening as she listened. I could see the questions forming behind her gaze. How had I done it? Why hadn't I told anyone? What did this mean for her carefully constructed world? I didn't answer those questions right away. Instead, I let the truth sink in slowly like a weight pressing down on the fragile walls of their assumptions. But it wasn't just about proving my worth. It was about exposing the cracks beneath her polished surface. Because beneath that perfect smile, I knew there was fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of being overshadowed. And I wasn't going to just stand there and let her keep me in the shadows. I was here to claim my place, to demand respect not just from her, but from everyone who had ever doubted me. As the evening wore on, conversations buzzed with new energy. Whispers of admiration mixed with disbelief. The family dynamics had shifted, the balance of power tilting in a way no one expected. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as the other sister, but as someone who had fought to be heard. The battle wasn't over, and I knew there would be resistance. But this night marked the beginning of a new chapter, one where I was no longer invisible. And as I looked at my sister, standing stiffly across the room, I saw something new in her eyes. Not just anger or resentment, but the first flicker of respect. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there, and I knew without a doubt that this revelation had changed everything. In the days following that gathering, the atmosphere around our family changed in subtle but unmistakable ways. I noticed how people who had once avoided me now seemed to approach with cautious curiosity. The whispered conversations in hallways shifted tone. They were no longer about what I lacked, but about what I had accomplished. It was as if my secret had pulled back a curtain, revealing a side of me that had always existed, but was deliberately ignored. For the first time, I felt a sense of validation, not from their approval, but from knowing I had taken control of my narrative. Yet the victory was bittersweet. My sister's reaction was far from forgiving. Behind closed doors, the resentment simmered, turning cold and calculating. I heard through the grapevine that she had been speaking to family members, twisting the story to paint me as selfish, ungrateful, and even reckless. It was an old tactic, trying to isolate me by rewriting the truth. But this time, I was prepared. I refused to let her control the narrative any longer. I started sharing my story openly, not just with family, but with friends and colleagues who had watched me grow in silence. Their support became a shield against the bitterness that tried to seep in from all sides. I realized that strength doesn't come from winning one battle alone, but from building a community that sees and supports you. The secret I had held so tightly was no longer just mine. It was a beacon for others who had felt overlooked or undervalued. Through it all, my sister's attempts to undermine me only fueled my resolve. Every accusation she hurled was met with calm facts and quiet confidence. I didn't need to shout louder than her. I just needed to be unwavering. This new balance of power unsettled her, and I saw it in the way her smiles became forced and her eyes flickered with frustration. The sister who once dismissed me was now trying to catch up, but I was already miles ahead. Despite the growing tension, I kept my focus on what truly mattered: my growth, my dreams, and my peace. I wasn't seeking revenge, but I wasn't going to back down either. The revelation wasn't just about proving something to her, it was about reclaiming my identity and refusing to be invisible any longer. And with every day that passed, I felt more confident that I had made the right choice to stand tall and speak my truth. One afternoon, a message popped up on my phone from an unknown number. My heart skipped a beat. Was it her? Was she reaching out to confront me again? But this message was different. It was from a mutual family friend, someone who had watched the drama unfold from the sidelines, but always stayed neutral. The message read, "I heard your story. I just want you to know you're not alone. You've inspired more people than you realize." That small note was like a lifeline thrown into the turbulent sea of family conflict. It reminded me that the fight I was in wasn't just personal. It resonated with so many others who had faced similar rejection and exclusion. I started to think about all the quiet battles people fought behind closed doors, the stories never told, the voices stifled by shame or fear. My sister's rejection had become a catalyst for something bigger, something that went beyond just our family. In the weeks that followed, I began to open up more publicly, sharing parts of my journey with friends and online communities. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from strangers who saw themselves in my story, who found hope in my courage to break free. That solidarity was a balm for my wounds, a reminder that healing comes not from isolation, but from connection. But with every step forward, the tension with my sister escalated. She was no longer just excluding me. She was actively trying to sabotage my relationships within the family and social circles. Invitations stopped coming, messages went unanswered, and I could feel the cold shoulder from those who once pretended to be neutral. It was a lonely place, but it was also a place of clarity. I knew who truly valued me and who was merely playing roles to protect their own image. Despite the isolation, I refused to retreat. The secret I had held so tightly was no longer a weapon to wield in private. It was my shield, my story of survival and triumph. I realized that true power comes from owning your truth, no matter how uncomfortable it makes others. And as my sister's world began to unravel quietly around her, I stood firm, ready for whatever came next. The lines had been drawn clearly now. This was no longer just a family dispute, it was a reckoning, and I was ready to face it head on. The tension reached its peak when I received an unexpected invitation to a small, private family meeting. It wasn't from my sister, but from our parents, the very people who had long stood silently at the center of the fractures between us. I debated whether to accept, knowing full well this could be another attempt to manipulate or undermine me. But something inside urged me to go, not for their sake, but for mine. I needed to hear what they had to say and show them I wasn't the same person who had once cowered in the shadows. When I arrived, the room was thick with unspoken grievances and awkward glances. My parents' faces were a mixture of regret and defensiveness, a stark contrast to the confident woman I had become. My sister sat beside them, her posture tense, eyes flickering between defiance and uncertainty. It was clear this wasn't just about a family gathering anymore. It was about the shifting power dynamics, the truth that could no longer be ignored. The conversation started hesitantly, with my parents fumbling through apologies that felt rehearsed, too little too late. They spoke of mistakes, misunderstandings, and the desire to heal old wounds. But beneath the surface, I sensed the same old patterns: expectations, guilt trips, and unspoken conditions. They wanted reconciliation on their terms, and I wasn't willing to accept that. I took a deep breath and spoke plainly, outlining how their exclusion and my sister's cruelty had affected me, not just emotionally, but in how I viewed myself for years. I described the pain of feeling unworthy, the years of silent struggle, and the strength it took to reclaim my identity. I didn't hold back. For the first time, I was fully seen and heard, and I made it clear that my forgiveness was not automatic. It was earned. My sister's expression shifted throughout the conversation. At times it was disbelief, at others, a flicker of respect. She realized that the sister she had tried to exclude was no longer the powerless girl she remembered. The woman in front of her was confident, resilient, and unafraid to stand her ground. When the meeting ended, there was no dramatic reconciliation or tears. Instead, there was a quiet acknowledgement of change, a subtle shift in how we related to one another. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, I felt that I had taken control not only of my story, but of the family dynamic itself. Walking away from that room, I felt a weight lift. I wasn't defined by their approval or rejection anymore. I was my own person, and that truth was the most powerful weapon I had. This was no longer just about family drama. It was about reclaiming my life on my terms. After that meeting, something inside me shifted, but it wasn't a sudden fix or magical reconciliation. Healing rarely is. Instead, it was the beginning of a new, complicated chapter, one where I had to balance hope for change with the reality of past wounds that didn't simply vanish. I realized that reclaiming my place in the family wouldn't be about erasing old pain, but learning to live alongside it, on my own terms. In the days that followed, I noticed the subtle but significant ways my family began to adjust. My sister's tone softened when we spoke, though the undercurrent of tension never fully disappeared. Our parents reached out with small gestures, a phone call here, a message there, awkward attempts to bridge the gap. I responded cautiously, guarded but willing to listen. I knew trust wasn't something you handed out lightly after years of neglect. Meanwhile, I kept building my life away from their influence, pouring my energy into the business and friendships that truly mattered. The success I had fought so hard for was no longer just about proving a point. It was about creating a foundation of security and self-worth that no one could shake. Each achievement was a brick in the wall I was building around myself, a fortress against old insecurities and toxic expectations. Yet, even as I grew stronger, the scars from years of exclusion ran deep. There were nights when doubt crept in, when I questioned if all this struggle was worth it, if I could ever fully shed the weight of being not good enough. But in those moments, I reminded myself of how far I'd come. I wasn't the girl hiding in the shadows anymore. I was the woman standing in the light, unafraid to own her story. My sister and I began to have more honest conversations, not perfect, but real. We talked about our shared history, the misunderstandings that had fueled so much pain, and the different ways we had both tried to survive. She confessed her own fears of losing control, of being replaced, and I shared the loneliness of feeling invisible. It wasn't easy, and there were setbacks, but those conversations planted seeds of understanding. One afternoon, she surprised me by showing up at my office with a tentative smile and an apology that felt genuine for the first time. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was enough, a crack in the armor we both wore. It reminded me that family, for all its messiness, has a strange way of holding on, even when it feels like everything has been broken. Through it all, I learned that strength isn't about never feeling hurt or angry. It's about choosing to keep moving forward despite those feelings. It's about setting boundaries without burning bridges and embracing the imperfect journey of reconciliation on your own terms. My story wasn't just about exclusion and revenge. It was about growth, forgiveness, and the courage to rewrite the narrative. And as I stood on the edge of this new chapter, I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer defined by who had tried to keep me out. I was defined by the woman I had become, strong, unapologetic, and ready to face whatever came next. As the months passed, the tension in our family didn't vanish overnight, but the landscape of our relationships began to change in ways I never thought possible. My sister and I were no longer enemies locked in a silent battle. We were, imperfectly, trying to find common ground. It wasn't easy. Old wounds still ached, and every so often, words were exchanged that cut deeper than intended. But beneath the rough edges was a fragile respect slowly taking root, a recognition that we both carried pain and resilience in our own ways. I discovered that reclaiming my place in the family wasn't about erasing the past or demanding perfection from anyone. It was about acceptance, accepting the flaws, the mistakes, and the complexities that come with being human. I learned to see my sister not just as the person who excluded me, but as someone shaped by her own fears and insecurities. This didn't excuse the hurt she caused, but it helped me understand that her actions were never just about me. They were part of a larger story of a family struggling to connect and heal. In this process, I also found a deeper sense of peace within myself. No longer did I carry the weight of needing validation from those who had once rejected me. I was free to define my worth on my own terms, and that freedom was liberating. The secret I had kept, the success, the strength, the resilience, was no longer hidden in the shadows, but lived openly and proudly. And with that openness came a new kind of power, the power to influence how my family saw me, but more importantly, how I saw myself. There were moments when I wondered if this fragile peace would hold. Family dynamics are complicated and old habits die hard. But I had changed, and that change gave me the strength to walk away from toxicity when it reared its head. I refused to be pulled back into patterns of exclusion, jealousy, or manipulation. Setting boundaries wasn't a sign of weakness. It was an act of survival, a declaration that I would no longer accept being diminished. One significant turning point came during a quiet evening at my home. My sister and I sat together sharing stories from our childhood, things we had never spoken about before. For the first time, we laughed without sarcasm, without underlying tension. We talked about our dreams, our fears, and the ways we had both tried to protect ourselves from pain. It was far from perfect, but it was real. That night, I felt something I hadn't in years. Hope. Hope that even fractured families can find healing. Hope that scars don't have to define us, but can be reminders of strength. Hope that choosing yourself, setting boundaries, demanding respect, refusing to be invisible, isn't selfish but necessary, and hope that sometimes the people who try to exclude you aren't the ones who get to write your story. This journey taught me that family isn't about flawless gatherings or perfect smiles. It's about showing up even when it's hard. It's about vulnerability and forgiveness, and sometimes it's about standing your ground. My sister tried to exclude me, claiming I was not good enough. But through patience, strength, and a willingness to face the truth, I revealed not just my success, but the woman I had become, the woman she could no longer ignore. And in that revelation, I found freedom. By the time the next family event rolled around, everything felt different. I wasn't that timid, overlooked sister who waited anxiously for approval or dreaded being pushed aside. I was someone who had fought hard to carve out her own space, someone who had faced rejection and come through it stronger. Walking into the room, I felt a quiet confidence, grounded in the knowledge that my worth was no longer tied to anyone else's acceptance. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation, as if everyone was waiting to see what would happen now, how the sister they had tried to exclude would carry herself, what place she would claim in the family circle. My sister's eyes met mine across the room, and for a moment, there was no hostility, only a complicated mix of emotions. I saw vulnerability beneath her polished exterior, a glimpse of the sister she once was before the years of rivalry and silence built walls between us. I moved through the gathering with ease, greeting relatives and friends without hesitation. Conversations flowed naturally, and I noticed the subtle shifts in how people looked at me, not with pity or condescension, but with genuine respect. It was a stark contrast to the years of feeling invisible or not good enough. That night, I was fully present, fully myself, and it felt like a victory in itself. Later, my sister and I found a quiet moment away from the crowd. No grand gestures, no dramatic apologies, just a conversation between two women who had endured more than most understood. She admitted quietly how hard it had been to watch me grow beyond the role she had always assigned me, how fear had driven her to push me away. I shared my pain, the loneliness of being excluded, and the strength I had found in silence. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was honest, and that honesty was a breakthrough. We agreed to keep talking to try building something new from the broken pieces of our past. It was tentative and fragile, but it was real, and that was enough. That night, as I lay in bed, I reflected on everything I had been through: the exclusion, the secret struggle, the eventual revelation. It hadn't been easy. The journey was marked by pain and setbacks, but it was also filled with moments of incredible growth and self discovery. I realized that the sister who tried to exclude me had unintentionally pushed me toward my greatest strength. By trying to erase me, she had helped me find my voice. Family gatherings would never be perfect, and some wounds might never fully heal. But I had learned that my value wasn't determined by others' opinions or by old roles I was forced to play. I was the author of my own story, and I was proud of the woman I had become. And for the first time, I looked forward to future gatherings, not with fear or resentment, but with cautious hope and a sense of peace. The transformation wasn't just about my relationship with my sister or family, it was about reclaiming my life in every sense. I began to apply the lessons I learned in family drama to other parts of my world. I set clearer boundaries in friendships and at work, recognizing the importance of protecting my peace. I stopped shrinking to make others comfortable and instead stepped fully into my power. One of the most unexpected gifts of this journey was how it reshaped my understanding of strength. It wasn't about loud confrontations or grand gestures. It was about quiet persistence, about showing up even when you're scared, about choosing yourself over guilt and obligation. It was about forgiveness, not necessarily forgetting or excusing harm, but freeing yourself from the weight of resentment. I found that when I chose to own my story, my true story, people around me responded in ways I never anticipated. Some relationships grew stronger, built on new foundations of honesty and respect. Others faded away, and that was okay. I no longer feared loss because I had gained something more valuable: peace with myself. Looking back, I understood why my sister tried to exclude me. It was her fear of being overshadowed, of losing control over a family narrative that had long favored her. But by stepping into the light and revealing my truth, I wasn't just claiming my place, I was inviting her and the rest of my family to see me as I really am. Whether they chose to embrace that or not was no longer my burden to carry. In the end, the greatest victory wasn't about making her kneel or proving I was good enough. It was about breaking free from a cycle of exclusion and silence, about finding strength in vulnerability, and about creating a space where I could be unapologetically myself. I learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply show up and refuse to be invisible. If you've ever been pushed aside, overlooked, or told you're not enough, know this: your story matters. Your strength is real, and sometimes the very thing that tries to break you becomes the foundation you build your life on. Choose yourself, stand tall, and never let anyone else define your worth.